से स्टार्ट करेंगे जी। तो पहला क्वेश्चन आता है यहाँ पर जी कि हाउ डू वी डिफाइन रीजनलिज्म इन इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस, हाउ इज द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ रीजनलिज्म रिलेटेड टू द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ रीजनल इंटीग्रेशन। तो देखो, सबसे पहली चीज ये है कि व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द वर्ड रीजनलिज्म, तो रीजनलिज्म एक अटेम्प्ट होता है। बेसिकली इट इज एन अटेम्प्ट बाय कंट्रीज प्राइमरली which are located in a specific geographical region to seek more cooperation, and not only to seek more cooperation but eventually seek cooperation to build structures that can politically, economically, militarily, and security wise help countries to grow. So, regionalism is what? It's a deliberate attempt. That means that any type of country trying to go for regionalism based policy will make a deliberate attempt in their foreign policy to go for what is called as establishing certain structures that will facilitate cooperation, and cooperation more so in elements like political, social, economic, and security. Now, see, one thing is very important, that practically when we look at countries and their foreign policy, any attempt by countries to promote this kind of regionalism will lead to what is called as regional integration. So the difference here is to be very clear to you, that regionalism is a concept that we look at the theoretical level. And when the regionalism is applied at the foreign policy level, the outcome that it produces is called regional integration. So regional integration will always be the outcome of the regionalism. Second important point to be remembered is that whenever regional integration will happen, it will facilitate more cooperation. So therefore, these three concepts are to be seen together: regionalism, regional integration, and cooperation. Regionalism, theoretically, when executed practically, will lead to regional integration, and the eventual outcome of regionalism theoretically, regional integration practically, will be cooperation. Cooperation will happen at the political, economic, security, whatever level the regionalism is basically used for. So that means certain countries have to take a deliberate attempt to do it. That is the first thing. Now you look at the second question, that in the realm of global politics, is regionalism a condition or a phenomena? Build the premise. So when we look at regionalism in the global context, let's understand one thing, that it's very difficult to identify regionalism as either a condition or a phenomenon. Because when we look at it at the realm of global politics here means that we are looking at regionalism concept purely through practice. That means at the foreign policy level. So at the foreign policy level, let's understand one thing. The first premise of our argument should be that regionalism at the global political level is a phenomena as well as a condition both. But how do we differentiate the two? The difference lies in this fact that when we say that regionalism is a condition, the word condition here means that it has certain usages of ideas to build affinity of states. Regionalism as a condition means that there are certain ideas. Countries are going to use these ideas. They are going to use these ideas at the global political level. Through these ideas, they are going to build certain elements of cooperation. So condition means ideas. One example of this is Afro-Asian solidarity. The Afro-Asian solidarity, an idea which was championed by India, idea which was supported by India at the global level. was based on one single premise, one single idea. The idea being that if Asia has the right to decolonize, it is imperative for Asia to teach it to Africa also how to get decolonized. So at the Afro-Asian conference level, the idea of India was that we will use foreign policy and basically use regionalism as a condition that we will also share with them the same idea that we have, that how we got decolonized, we will share it with you. Now look at the second word there. The second word says that see it as a phenomena. Phenomena here basically means that when you use regionalism, you try to achieve an outcome. Phenomena means that there will be an outcome. Now remember one thing, idea will only lead to an outcome. Without having an idea, number one, you will never do regionalism. So only if you have an idea, will you use that idea to create an outcome. So for example, when we had the idea of Afro-Asian solidarity, we used that idea to promote in Africa how India used certain techniques to get decolonized. Our techniques that we developed, we promoted them in Africa. Africa utilized them. Certain African countries got decolonized. So that is why the very first premise in the beginning, as I said, is that distinguishing between condition and distinguishing between a phenomena is next to impossible. You cannot distinguish the two, because having a condition will only lead to what is called as a phenomena eventually. So both facilitate regionalism, both facilitate regional integration, and both facilitate cooperation. So your vocabulary, your thought process has to be such that you have to keep in mind that any form of regionalism will eventually lead to regional integration, will eventually promote cooperation. So whenever the word regionalism comes, you have to remember regionalism is equal to regional integration is equal to cooperation. And you have to also remember there will always be an idea. That idea will lead to what is called as an outcome. These 5 points must be there whenever you write an answer with respect to regionalism. Only then your thought process will be clearly built. Now come to the next question. Analyze the thesis of regionalism propounded by the working peace system theory. Build the argument using the scholarly premise. Scholar here is called David Mitrani. David Mitrani. Mitrany. Mitrani. David Mitrani is a very important scholar. Now, when you look at David Mitrani, he has given what is called as the world peace system theory. What is the basic idea of the world peace system theory? It says that you must propose regional cooperation on technical areas. These technical areas where you promote regional cooperation shall be called functional areas. Any attempt to promote regional cooperation in technical areas which will be called as functional area based cooperation will basically promote more interdependence. So his idea is very simple and clear. Any two countries that want to promote regionalism, they must identify certain technical areas where they can undertake certain exchanges. Those technical areas that they identify are going to be called functional areas of cooperation. Any attempt to promote functional area centric cooperation will promote what is called as more interdependence between the two. The more the countries become interdependent with each other, the more they will contribute not only to regional peace but also to world peace. So idea here is that let there be a world peace model, and let that world peace model be established through what is called as interdependence with each other, which is premised on technical centric functional area cooperation. So identify technical areas. Now, when he says the word identify technical areas, he says that there are technological advantages that each country has. Certain countries even if they feel that they may not be technologically very advanced, they will still possess a certain elements of technology that they can leverage in their foreign policy to cooperate. Because he says that there can be no country in the world which says that I do not have technology. Technology does not mean something which is happening in the moment of the time. Technology can be anything that may be a part of your history also, which you have historically used. Identify that element to promote cooperation in that area. But he says that when you undertake a presentation of that technology as a functional area to some other country, try to make sure that there is a perceptual ability of the other country to accept your technology. Don't propose a technology that another country as a functional area may find no relevance of. A very simple example in this regard can be the example of India's relationship with Central Asia today. India has identified that the people of Central Asia are people who prefer what is called as Ayurvedic system of medicine. Ayurveda is one of the technologies, you can say, that India has tried to leverage in its foreign policy, more specifically with Central Asia. And as part of our engagement with Central Asia today, India undertakes a major export of Ayurvedic products, which have been scientifically documented and researched in India to promote an element of cooperation in the realm of what is called as public health. So today, India and Central Asia are working together as part of David Mitrani's model of the world peace system theory, where they are trying to say that the best way to manage public health is through the usage of what we call as Ayurveda and traditional medicine. अब देखो, Ayurveda, whatever we may have, is not something as a technology which is, comparable to, let's say, a robotic technology that the Japanese may invent. It is not similar to something like, for example, what America may develop in the form of some supersonic, hypersonic missile. But it is our way of identifying an area of functional cooperation. Because we know that there is a perceptual ability in the Central Asians to accept it, because historical relations between India and Central Asia have been such. Whereas part of the ancient Silk Route, a lot of Indian medicinal herbs were always found in Central Asia. And it is this ancient Silk Route where medicinal herbs were taken from India to Central Asia, that the people of Central Asia today are accustomed to using those medicinal herbs. So going and telling somebody in Central Asia about the benefits of turmeric for, let's say, immunity building is not something that will generate amused responses. They are the people who already know about the benefits. Now, one thing is very important that David Mitrani says that if you are able to identify such an element of functional area centric cooperation, you will always try to maintain a peaceful relation to build that relation. By India, Central Asia now will always try to leverage this level of public health cooperation. Central Asia will also try to position India as a player amongst other regional players which border Central Asia. So what will happen is gradually concentric circles will establish. And these concentric circles that will establish around Central Asia, where Central Asia does promotion of India's functional cooperation, will enlarge the ambit of peace. So David Mitrani says that every country in the world, whichever wants to promote deeper ties with each other, start by identifying technical areas of functional cooperation. This will not only create bilateral peace, it will create regional peace, it will also create international peace. So keeping this in mind, now let us see the next question. How has Ernest Haas contributed in the thesis? Elaborate the thesis with illustrative examples to build the argument. Ernest Haas says another important point. Ernest Haas says that instead of identifying technical areas where some countries may struggle, one can also have a functional cooperation at the level of federal level. He says that at the federal level, you should identify that there are certain values that you can always promote as a functional element of cooperation in the other country. And at the federal level, if there are certain kind of elements that you can promote to another country, not only you should identify them but promote them. For example, when Bhutan wanted to transition to democracy, they looked upon to India. At the federal level, India initiated a democracy-centric functional cooperation with Bhutan, where at that time, India associated its election commission to go and teach to Bhutan the basic principles of democracy. That how institutional architecture of election commission, how at the district level, state level, provincial level, you have to create multiple institutions to basically establish democracy in your state. Ernest Haas in his book has actually used this case study of India Bhutan. And he says that this approach of functional cooperation, where India promoted democracy in Bhutan through this aspect, is far more effective as an approach. Where, if you look at America, which also tries to promote democracy, but America's approach of democracy promotion is more of imposition of democracy. So he says that instead of America trying to use military as a power to impose democracy, had America used functional elements, considering it's one of the oldest democracies, had they used those elements of functional cooperation, things would have been way better. But the problem is that he says that functionally, India has been much more effective at this regard to promote this kind of cooperation. He gives another very important example. He says that Gulf Cooperation Council countries, GCC countries, he says GCC countries at the federal level have a functional area of collaboration with each other to decide what will be the oil output, where they decide this oil output on a very frequent basis through various multiple meetings. And GCC countries politically at the federal level try to engage with each other to basically go for functional cooperation on deciding the oil output, so that they are in a position to ensure that the oil output makes dent in the global demand supply market, because global demand and supply shall fluctuate. So all these GCC countries cannot continuously produce the same amount of oil. If they believe that there is going to be a demand of oil which is going to rise in the future, they will appropriately alter the demand. They will also ensure that at the federal level they cooperate with each other to meet that demand. And if they find that there is a slump, by an example, COVID happened, lockdown happened, globally countries are shut down, so oil requirement is not there. So to ensure that refineries do not produce that amount of oil, the refinery oil production has to be reduced. This is only possible if at the federal level you have those channels of cooperation. So here what Ernest Haas is trying to say in the context of GCC is that at the GCC level, there is a political level cooperation, and this political level cooperation on deciding the oil output is then executed diplomatically. So if some country demands more oil, if there is a global rise in the demand of the oil, politically a decision will be taken. Okay, we will increase the oil output. And then there will be a diplomatic way of selling that oil to that country. And vice versa if it is the reduction of the case. So he says that rather than identifying technical areas, because today technical areas of cooperation may not be that fruitful, try and identify those areas which are more fruitful, which are at the federal level. And why he emphasizes upon federal level should also be very clear to you, because he says at the federal level what happens is that the governments have a clear vision of the foreign policy. So they are best in a position to identify what federal level elements of cooperation may be workable. So that is the reason why they prefer to use those elements. Now come to the next question, that what prompts the emergence of regionalism as an inevitable development? Examine this through the prism of scholars used above. Give illustrative examples to justify thesis in practical realm of diplomacy. So now our objective is to see that what has been advocated by David Mitrani and Ernest Haas, how these two elements given by these two scholars work at the global level, and how they promote what is called as regionalism, thereby making it as an inevitable development. So here the example that we are going to use is the example of globalization. See, because of globalization, what has happened now is that there is what is called as emergence of transnational actors. These transnational actors, because of globalization today, work very closely with government organizations. Government organizations and transnational actors collectively work together to ensure that number one, regional cooperation is further built. So today, number one, under the larger era of globalization, government is not the sole actor. Thereby, because of the coming of transnational actors into the picture, regionalism today is inevitable. Even if government does not know where to collaborate, the transnational actors may identify areas where you can collaborate. So what we are trying to say is कि भाई at the federal level, Ernest Haas says you identify federal cooperation areas. Similarly, David Mitrani says technical areas. But what if you are bound in a situation where you do not know that, okay, I don't know what federal areas, I don't know what technical areas, then what? Do you not do regionalism? Answer is no. You still do regionalism, because if government organizations fail to identify areas to promote regionalism, we always have transnational actors who can work with the government to identify areas of cooperation. Example is that when in Syria we had the Syrian civil war post Arab Spring 2011-12 onwards, lot of Syrian refugees were going from Syria all the way to Europe, and Europe was witnessing an influx of refugees. Now, European governments at that time did not know how to react. So, as a result of which, transnational organizations based in America began working with European governments. One such example was a transnational organization in America whose name was American Progress. American Progress was name of a basically transnational group in US, which began to work closely with the European governments to provide for rehabilitation and relief measures for all Syrian refugees coming into Europe. So when European countries were absolutely clueless on what to do, it is in this backdrop that a transnational organization came out of the blue to present a solution. So that is what we are saying, that regionalism is inevitable. While America may have had no interest directly in helping Syrian refugees in Europe, but thanks to globalization, this American transnational group called American Progress eventually got entangled with Europe. So that means that the regionalism cannot be hindered today. Globalization will create spaces automatically. Even where governments fail to think, transnational organizations will come up. So one thing is very clear, that American Progress emerged as one of the classic elements where neither technical area cooperation was done. That means David Mitrani failed, yet regionalism was inevitable. Here there was no federal level cooperation because American government was not involved. Yet there was Ernest Haas not applicable. But you see, there was a third force applicable because of globalization, which is the case of the transnational groups. And these groups identified opportunity in the context of Syrian civil war to help the European governments to provide for accommodation, relief, rehabilitation of those Syrian refugees going to Europe. Now, because of this, what happened was that the European transnational groups, European governments got exposed to American transnational groups. So you see the eventual important outcome that we are trying to look at here is this, that if regionalism is inevitable because of globalization, regionalism that happens because of globalization eventually enhances your exposure. And that exposure that it eventually enhances helps countries to establish knowledge management case studies. But today, this entire case study of American progress is a well documented case study in the domain of international relations. That how, despite not having any cooperation occurring at transnational level because of no federal contact, no kind of technical area, yet globalization automatically created a space. And thereby it ended up in increasing the exposure of the European governments to American transnational groups, European transnational groups to the American transnational groups, and vice versa, American transnational groups to European governments, which would have otherwise not happened. So, point to remember is globalization is a driver. It will inevitably promote regionalism. It will seek spaces to promote regionalism on its own. So, globalization will always remain a driver. It will never hinder, will automatically create spaces. Now, if you look at the next question, what is the regionalism security community thesis and who are its lead proponents? Examine the argument. See, the regionalism security community thesis is proposed by a person whose name is Amitai Edzioni. Amitai, Amitai Edzioni, Etzioni, Edzioni. Amitai Edzioni is a very important scholar who says that at a regional level, merely federal, technical, transnational groups, these are not the only ways through which regionalism can occur. He says a very important thing, that regionalism historically has occurred also at the level of what is called as security. And security has been an important driver of regionalism. He says that after French Revolution, when Congress of Vienna was called and Concert of Europe was established, that Concert of Europe was established to check revival of revolutions across Europe. फंडामेंटल ऑफ वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री अगर किया होगा तो बताया था उसमें मैंने आपको ये सब. So he says that that was the first ever example that Concert of Europe emerged as that security check to balance of the revolutions that were occurring. Balance of those revolutions. And then he says that during the Cold War period, we have seen more such cases. For example, he says during the Cold War, what was North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Same. What was Warsaw Treaty Organization? Same. And he says that since the end of the Cold War also, there is no end to it. Even today, the world continues to engage at the security level. However, there is one change. Amitai Edzioni says that today, security-centric thesis is visible more amongst like-minded countries. That is why today you have a rise of what we call as mini-laterals. For example, quadrilateral security dialogue. Quadrilateral security dialogue is a clear example of how a mini-lateral group, security-centric, but with like-minded countries have come together. So he says that the world has witnessed what is called as a huge change in the way they cooperate security. He says that the Trump administration's challenges to NATO also proves that heavier, bulkier type security groupings may not have a future. That is why Trump administration's approach to create AUKUS, Trump administration's approach to create Quad, and Trump's approach to weaken NATO. He deliberately never weakened NATO, sir. He only told in NATO that America is not going to basically support people and provide for security unless other people also pay for their security, which was something that was agreed as part of NATO. When NATO was conceptualized, NATO was conceptualized on the principle that while America will be a lead financial contributor, all NATO members shall also provide for financial contribution in NATO for their own security. But over a period of time, the American military industrial complex became so large that they started getting so much of business from other NATO members that this point was done away with. It was forgotten silently. When Trump came, he says, ki, bhai, we will emphasize upon this point. He was highly criticized. He is basically trying to roll back NATO. Sir, there is nothing called roll back NATO. He is only emphasizing that in NATO, if there is a provision, it has to be exercised. Why should America take the responsibility of providing security to others unless others do not pay for their security? So it is in this context, the declinist thesis of NATO, the revival of quadrilateral security dialogue, the creation of AUKUS. All these three very categorically prove that world is moving towards new security groupings, which are regional security groups, but number one, lighter, more flexible, and more importantly, groups of like-minded countries. So unless you do not have a similar value that binds you, you may not see the revival of new security groups. That is why Amitai Etzioni in his thesis says that SCO today is a problem. China wants to position SCO basically as a security group. Russia wants to use SCO for the purpose of checking China's security policy. India wants to use SCO for the purpose of enhancing economy. Pakistan wants to use SCO only to create regional obstruction. None of these people have a like-minded attitude. Amitai Etzioni explains that why SCO may never transform into a successful grouping, even though it is a smaller group, which is the new feature of regional security cooperation today. So his fundamental thesis is very clear. Unless you do not have countries on the same value platform, unless you do not have countries that have the same values, you will not be able to cooperate. Now we come to the next question, which says that regions are often politically and socially construed as imagined communities. No, see, this is a functional area of cooperation. So this will then be explained at the functional level. David Mitrani thesis. Now we come to regions are often politically and socially construed as imagined communities. Illustrate the thesis with the case of SARC. See, this is a point. This, in fact, statement which is given in your question is given by a person whose name is Andrew Haywood, who has written multiple books on IR also. Andrew Haywood. Andrew Haywood says that SARC is a very important example of a region which is politically, socially construed as an imagined community. Imagined community means that he says that this entire region where SARC countries are located today historically were one territorial integrated unit. This one territorial integrated unit was then subsequently broken down into multiple pieces. Breaking down was not for administrative convenience. Breaking down of these territories was done purely for strategic considerations. For example, there used to be a point of time when Afghanistan also we know was almost on the fringes of India and nothing but an extension of India. But the fact that British deliberately created Afghanistan, Andrew Haywood says that the creation of Afghanistan, even though Afghani people may have had a separate culture, separate way of life, but the fact that they were always a part of the larger one integrated territorial unit, they were broken down to create a modern state of Afghanistan because British had the strategic objective of countering the Soviet threat at that time. Similarly, creating Pakistan in 1947, an imagined country that never existing or never existed on paper. That country also was created out of strategic compulsions so that the Americans could use and the British could use the Pakistani waters as a base and the northern territories of Pakistan as a base to basically again look at the Soviet Union. For that matter, erstwhile ancient history of our country also proves that the people living in Ceylon, that later on became Tamil, that dominated area of Sri Lanka, is not something which was alien from India. In fact, Sri Lanka historically had always been a part of India only. But that territory was broken. For that matter, Andrew Haywood traces India's history back to the point where in the eastern side, India's border was basically touching South China Sea at Vietnam to that of the boundary of Persian Empire with Iran. Andrew Haywood says that all the way from Vietnam to Afghanistan was one territorial integrated unit called India. That was sliced out into multiple territories for strategic reasons. Because of this slicing out, what has happened is that the culture and ethnic way of life of the people still remains the same. But regionalism today is hindered, unfortunately, because of artificially created borders. Number one. Number two, he says not only regionalism is hindered because of artificially created borders, but there are some countries who have been provoked to even challenge the borders, thereby developing revisionist attitudes. For example, Pakistan. Always and always trying to challenge the boundary, saying that I am not satisfied with the boundary. For that matter, the Afghans challenging the border that Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Balochistan is a territory that belongs to us. For that matter, even in the northeast, there is a fundamental difference between India and Myanmar also. There are territorial issues between the two. While they are not that serious, but there are serious otherwise issues that exist there. So, what Andrew Haywood is trying to say is that in these historically imagined political and social communities, which at one point of time lived as integrated unit, regionalism at that time was very effective. Slicing of these territories for strategic reasons, number one, affected the regionalism. And in the modern times, the regionalism got affected because of revisionism. So he says that these are two barriers in the SARC today. That one, historically, they were sliced off because of what is called as strategic considerations. That is the first barrier in the cooperation of SARC countries. Second barrier is, he says, that there are in the SARC area certain revisionist powers. And he says that these revisionist powers are not powers who are revisionist inherently, as I said. They are revisionist because they have been provoked to be revisionist. So provoked to be revisionist means that they are deliberately doing revisionism so that they hinder regional cooperation. Not that they are doing any kind of revisionism because they ought to do so. Pakistan today has no claim over Kashmir. They have no logical reason to claim Kashmir. Yet they claim Kashmir. They have been provoked by the Americans, prior to that by the British, today by the Chinese. So the fact is very clear that revisionism and strategic considerations, according to Andrew Haywood thesis, become the two important barriers that prevent the regionalism here. Now see the next question. What are crucial determinant forms of regionalism? Three crucial determinant forms of regionalism exist. The first and foremost is the economic determinant, which has been seen in the world. One example of economic determinant has been the case of BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal Initiative of Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation. So BIMSTEC is an example where there was a need felt that India's northeast can economically grow And these weaker countries in the Bay of Bengal region can economically grow. All of them can leverage the Bay of Bengal as a water area, and to facilitate maritime trade, facilitate land trade, BIMSTEC can become that regional platform. However, BIMSTEC today has not become successful for one very important reason, because BIMSTEC is an area which has become a battleground of competition between India and China. Today, India has a lot of interest in using BIMSTEC today to develop it. But countries in the BIMSTEC today, because of their affinity to China, today try to basically prevent India to utilize the development of BIMSTEC. So it is in this backdrop that BIMSTEC has not been able to visualize its true potential that it has. Second crucial form of determinant is political, where countries align politically on the basis of certain political values. So, for example, one old example of this political value based cooperation can be seen in the form of Arab League. The countries which were part of the Arab League, most of the Sunni Muslim countries, tried to create a Sunni Ummah, UMMAH, Ummah. Similarly, another example here can be Pivot to Asia. Pivot to Asia is also called the Asian Rebalancing Initiative. Asian Rebalancing Initiative or Pivot to Asia is an initiative given by the Americans. It was given by President Obama in 2010-11. Asian Rebalancing Initiative was Obama's way of tackling China. The idea was to use ideologically linked countries around India, around China, including South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, etc., to build an element of cooperation. Third here is the strategic, where regionalism may emerge as a determinant at the strategic level. For example, NATO, Warsaw Pact. These are all strategic regional groups. They had strategic objectives to achieve. Today, another example of strategic here can be Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, AUKUS. These are two strategic level groups. So these are three crucial forms of determinants that help us to understand how regionalism may manifest. Now, keeping that in mind, let us look at the next question. Who is the proponent of the incremental path of regionalism thesis? Build the argument. There is a scholar by the name of Hethne, Hethne. Hethne. Hethne has given the incremental path of regionalism thesis. See, Hethne's ideas are not very novel. Why? Because all that he says is that in order to do regionalism, you have to start at the political level. This is what he says. He says that start at the political level. When you start at the political level, let the government of your country identify elements to promote regional cooperation. Once the government of a country identifies those elements, they must then venture using the political level of contacts to promote what is called as economic regionalism. So political parties, political actors must identify that what are the realms of economic regionalism that are possible. And they must try to propose areas where economically they can cooperate. Once economically countries are regionally integrated, and once they basically go for economic regionalism, they must try to deepen that through promotion of trade agreements. So his idea is that regionalism is not something that can happen in one day. You have to go step by step incrementally. Start at the political level, then go at the economic level, then deepen economic level. How do you deepen economic level? By signing what he says, various kind of trade agreements like free trade agreements, preferential trade agreements, etc. An idea is that once you are economically integrated with each other, he says that in any scenario, you will never be able to exploit each other's fault lines. Because once you are economically integrated, exploiting fault lines will never be done. However, there are examples where this is not the case. By for example, we know that India and US are economically integrated to each other. There is a huge amount of trade between India, China also today. And despite the fact that India, China, India, US both have a significant chunk of economic cooperation, yet both of them exploit the fault lines which are there. So Hetne's thesis, as I said, number one is neither novel because it does not propose any new idea, and for that matter does not actually capture the changing dynamics of the world. Because where he lacks is the point that if a country is economically too integrated with the other country can always use that economic integration as a fault line itself. Case in point, China plus US. By China today knows India is so economically integrated to me that I can arm twist India whenever I want. Because at the end of the day, the kind of things that the Indians are buying from us, they are never going to buy these things from anybody else. Nobody else in the world is going to give them these things. So because they are dependent upon us only, same is for US. Today, USA knows that India at the defense level has to buy stuff from us. The stuff that we have is not the stuff that the Russians have. So they are bound to be dependent upon us. So we will arm twist them if they display any deviant behavior. So Hetne's idea, as we conclude, is not practically diplomatically, giving the results as per his theory. So his theory requires more empirical verification before it can become a template for regional cooperation. But his idea, which is definitely a part of the theory building, is incrementalism helps. Go step by step. Regionalism doesn't happen in one day. You require political will to do it, then you require economic dimensions to be identified to be done. That is the only point that we agree to it, nothing beyond that. Now we see the next question. What is spaghetti bowl thesis of regionalism? Who are the scholars championing this? And elaborate the thesis with the example. So, sir, spaghetti bowl is basically a thesis given by Jagdish Bhagwati. So, Jagdish Bhagwati says that spaghetti bowl approach primarily means number one, a kind of regionalism where the focus is purely on trade. And the trade is basically because that is the core national interest of the state. Trade because it is the core national interest of the state. So Jagdish Bhagwati says that because trade is one of the national interests, the countries will never go for a war, as it will affect the not only trade but also affect the national interest, which is the trade. But then he says another important thing. He says that in order to make sure that this trade is done on a deep basis, countries have identified a spaghetti bowl. Spaghetti bowl means that a bowl where there are multiple units engaged. For example, academics are engaged, NGOs and civil society is engaged. Similarly, businessmen are engaged, media groups are engaged. So as a result of which, because multiple actors are involved to deepen that trade, none of these actors will, number one, try to create a scenario where trade gets affected. Even if, now Jagdish Bhagwati says that even if governments try to inhibit trade because of some or the other reason, the spaghetti bowl is so varied that those elements in the spaghetti bowl will always put pressure upon the government to basically rectify the trade. By take the case of India-China. After the recent Ladakh clash that happened in 2020, government of India went on to say कि भाई we will become Atmanirbhar. Under the idea of becoming Atmanirbhar, the eyewash given to the public was that we will reduce our trade dependence from China. because we will produce things domestically. But sir, the academic world knew very clearly it's not possible. Certain media groups knew very clearly it was not possible. The business communities knew very clearly that if they don't get raw material from China, where will they get the raw material from? Collectively, all these agents, Jagdish Bhagwati says, pressurize the government to normalize the relationship with China. And see, today, when India, China stand at a place where they have signed a border agreement, and as per that agreement, they have tried to diffuse the crisis. These underlying actors of the spaghetti bowl have basically won because they have pressurized the government to not only mold its attitude, but they have pressurized the government to not let the trade get affected. See, the irony is that even at a time when we were making those bold statements that we will not do trade with China, let's ban Chinese trade, ban Chinese products, etc., the trade was still continuing. If you look at the trade figures between India China from 2021, 22, 22, 23, 23, 24, there is no decline. In fact, there's only increase. That clearly proves the fact that it was merely political sloganeering. Ki we will reduce the trade. Reality was there was no reduction in the trade. Spaghetti bowl remained very active. So spaghetti bowl is what, sir? It is a group of multiple actors involved who have an interest in ensuring that the trade remains intact. And they will basically apply pressure at appropriate points. So it is not wrong to say in a layman language that what Jagdish Bhagwati says is that because a trade is the core principle on which two countries engage, as it is the national interest, you will have pressure groups around that trade built to ensure that the trade is not affected. So spaghetti bowl is nothing but a bowl full of what is called as pressure groups. These pressure groups will always play a role. How successful will they be? See, in the case of India, China, it took 4 years. So there is a lot of patience because see, when it comes to the Chinese, we need to have a lot of patience because we don't really understand how they go about their activities on a regular basis. So patience has to be there. Now, if you look at the next question, sir, what is the relevance of the new international division of power and the new international division of labor thesis examined through the scholarly prism? See, the scholar here is again that same fellow who was quite useless. His name is Hethne. Hethene. Hethne. So Hethne has again come out with a point here. He says that during the Cold War period, when the communist countries existed, they basically took care of the labor interests. And to take care of the labor interest, communist countries during the Cold War period had established the new International Division of Labor. So under this new International Division of Labor, which was basically visualized by communist countries as a pressure group, they tried to assert maximum pressure even in the capitalist countries to make sure that policies for the labor welfare are carried out. Because they all had this one common global objective, which was a underlying current of regionalism. That underlying current of regionalism was that labor interests globally are the same. So they ought to be protected. So idea was that Hethne says, see, we have labor interests which are there common in Soviet Union also and common in US also. Because we are in Soviet Union, we must take the responsibility to protect the labor interest of the US also. Because in US nobody has capitalist countries. US is a capitalist country, so in US nobody will stand for the labor interest. So they created a pressure group, international pressure group. That was called the New International Division of Labor. This acted as a pressure group even in capitalist countries to pressurize them to adopt labor-friendly policies. Then Hethne says that when the Cold War ended and the communist bloc declined, the new International Division of Labor was now replaced with a new body called the New International Division of Power. And now this new International Division of Power has, number one, continued the same agenda. But see, he says another important point. He says that what the new international division of power today has done in the post-Cold War period when the communist states are gone is that not only it protects the labor interests, but it also facilitates what is called as the movement of labor. Facilitates the movement of skilled labor from one country to the other country. So he says that today the labor dynamics are new. Today, in order to foster global level regionalism, not only labor interests have to be protected in different countries, but today to protect, to basically look at the globalization, what we also have to do is we have to make sure that there is skilled labor moving frequently and easily from one country to the other. This is where Ethne goes on to say that today economic citizenship is a concept championed by the new international division of power, NIDP. So he says NIDP today champions and promotes the concept of economic citizenship. Under economic citizenship today, you can easily move from one country to another country, relocate there, utilize your skills in a foreign country. And if you utilize your skills in a foreign country, you contribute to globalization based growth everywhere. So today there is a new element added. That is why you see today there are countries that offer what we call as Ethne explains, golden visa. See, golden visa is basically a visa that you can purchase. Golden visa in a more simple language is like a investment where you can pay money upfront and buy a passport of a foreign country. Become citizen of a foreign country. आप ये चीज देखो सर कि एक कंट्री है टर्की, आपने सुना होगा। टर्की आज की डेट में इंडियन सिटीजन्स को गोल्डन वीजा ऑप्शन देती है। और आपको पता है गोल्डन वीजा टर्की का कितने का है? 3 करोड़ रुपए का। अब आप कहोगे कि पैसा तो बहुत है, नो डाउट बहुत है। आप सोचो कि सर कोई व्यक्ति इंडिया में अगर आज की डेट में किसी शहर में प्रॉपर्टी खरीदने जाए तो शहर की प्रॉपर्टी के हिसाब से पहली बात तो 3 करोड़ कुछ भी नहीं है, क्योंकि शहर में लैंड का क्या प्राइस है सबको पता है आपको। अब आप ये देखो कि टर्की आपको क्या ऑफर कर रहा है। टर्की कह रहा है कि आप 3 करोड़ रुपए लेके आओ, आप 3 करोड़ रुपए में अपनी फैमिली के साथ आओ, जिसमें आप एक प्रिंसिपल पर्सन हो और फैमिली के 2 मेंबर और हों। अब वो 2 मेंबर में आप या तो अपने पेरेंट्स को ले जाओ, और अगर आप शादीशुदा हो तो शादीशुदा होने के बाद आप अपनी वाइफ या स्पाउस और स्पाउस के साथ अपने 2 बच्चों तो मैक्सिमम, यानी कि उस केस में 4 तक की लिबर्टी है। अब टर्की देखो तीसरी चीज क्या कहता है, वो कहता है कि भाई साहब 3 करोड़ रुपए जब आप लाके मुझे दोगे तो मैं 3 करोड़ रुपए लूंगा नहीं आपसे। आप 3 करोड़ रुपए लेके आओ और टर्की के अंदर कहीं पर भी किसी भी शहर में जाके 3 करोड़ का मकान खरीद लो, रियल एस्टेट में आप पैसा लगा दो। अब आपने जब रियल एस्टेट में पैसा लगा दिया तो आपका एक एसेट हो गया टर्की में। कह रहा है जिस दिन आपने टर्की में एक एसेट खरीद लिया, वो एसेट खरीद के वो कागज मेरे पास ले आओ, आपकी पूरी फैमिली को हम टर्किश पासपोर्ट इशू कर देंगे। अच्छा, अब टर्किश पासपोर्ट का एडवांटेज कि सर आज की डेट में 110 कंट्रीज वीजा फ्री एक्सेस। सी द पावर ऑफ द पासपोर्ट। अब आप कॉन्सेप्ट को समझो ना, इतने के वो कह रहा है कि भाई साहब अगर इंडिया से कोई व्यक्ति टर्की गया, 3 करोड़ रुपए का उसने रियल एस्टेट इन्वेस्टमेंट किया, उसको 110 कंट्री का वीजा फ्री एक्सेस मिल रहा है। उन 110 कंट्री वीजा फ्री एक्सेस में से 60 ऐसी कंट्रीज हैं जिन कंट्रीज में आपको जाकर राइट टू रिजाइड एंड वर्क मिल रहा है, जो टर्किश पासपोर्ट होल्डर के लिए है। ये एक देखो केस। अच्छा, आपको सुन के बड़ा आश्चर्यजनक चीज लगेगी, इटली ने हाल ही में पता है क्या शुरू करा है सर। आपको सुन के बड़ा अम्यूजमेंट लगेगा कि इटली हैज वेरी रिसेंटली लॉन्च्ड इन द मंथ ऑफ अगस्त दिस ईयर समथिंग कॉल्ड एज अ टेक्निकल नोमैड वीजा। You know what is a technical nomad visa? If you are working on a technical project or if you have a IT based business, all you have to do is just show us the registration of the business. Italy will give you a visa for 2 years to come reside in Italy and work from Italy. Come here, open a bank account, start doing transactions in Italy, from Italy. एंड लिव हियर विदाउट एनी टेंशन। इतने ये कह रहा है सर कि न्यू इंटरनेशनल डिवीजन ऑफ पावर जो कर रही है ना सर, ये टाइप के नए नए कोऑपरेशंस को एक्सप्लोर कर रही है। सर आज की डेट में जितने भी लोग वर्क फ्रॉम होम वाले हैं, आप सोचो कि उनके लिए ये कितनी बड़ी चीज है। डिजिटल टेक्निकल वीजा लगवा लिया आपने, ये नोमैड वाला ये क्या कहते हैं इसका इटली का, चले गए आप। वर्क फ्रॉम होम करना, अब वो यहाँ से करो या इटली से करो, सर कम से कम इटली में क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ तो है। यहाँ देखो नरकिया लाइफ। और सोचो सर, मतलब मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ, मेरे एक दोस्त से मेरी बात हो रही थी जो बॉम्बे में रहता है, मेरे को कह रहा है यार मैं एक घर खरीदूंगा बॉम्बे में, 7 करोड़ का फ्लैट ले रहा है दादर में। मैंने कहा दादर एक वहां पर गंदा सा इलाका है, वहां पे 7 करोड़ का फ्लैट। मैंने कहा यार मतलब क्यों, क्यों ही अपराध कर रहा है तू 7 करोड़ का। मैं कहा टर्की चले जा, 7 करोड़ में भाई साहब वहां पे तेरे को मतलब कोठी मिल जा, बीच फेसिंग कोठी अगर चाहिए तो, मेडिटेरेनियन क्लाइमेट। यहाँ पे सुबह तू खोलेगा तेरे को शिंदे की शक्ल दिखेगी, सोच मैं कितना फर्क है देख। लेकिन समस्या पता है क्या है सर? परिवारवाद। सारा कल्प्रिट है परिवारवाद। अब वो व्यक्ति इस चीज के बारे में इसलिए नहीं सोच पा रहा क्योंकि उसने शादी कर ली, और शादी करके काबू नहीं हुआ, कंट्रोल नहीं था, बच्चे हो गए, अब फंस गए। यार बीवी नहीं मानेगी, मैं क्या तो लाया क्यों ऐसी बीवी। पहले ही माइंडसेट लेके आते ना भैया कि मैडम से पूछ लेते कि भाई हमें तो आगे जाके बाहर ही जाना है। अब ले आए, अब भुगतो। बच्चों की स्कूलिंग, मैंने कहा भाई साहब टर्की में, मैंने उसको बताया, मैं क्या चिल्ड्रन हैव फ्री एजुकेशन थ्रू आउट लाइफ, फ्री मेडिकल फैसिलिटी फॉर द इंटायर टर्किश पासपोर्ट होल्डर। आप किसी भी हॉस्पिटल में टर्की के कहीं पे भी घुस जाओ सर, ऑल मेडिकल ट्रीटमेंट इज फ्री। मैं क्या सोचो, सी लुक एट व्हाट द न्यू इंटरनेशनल डिवीजन ऑफ पावर इज डूइंग टुडे सर। हाउ टू अट्रैक्ट ग्लोबल टैलेंट। आर यू गेटिंग द आइडिया सर? हाउ टू अट्रैक्ट ग्लोबल टैलेंट। अच्छा, अब आपको एक चीज समझनी है कि इटली जैसी कंट्री को क्या फायदा हुआ वीजा देके। भाई अगर आप 2 साल के लिए इटली चले जाओगे, इटली जाके रहोगे सर, वहां पे जाके अपनी कंजम्पशन करोगे ना, खाना पीना, किराए का घर, रहना, सब कुछ। इटली की इकोनॉमी में तो धीरे धीरे कंजम्पशन होगा ना सर, उनको कंजम्पशन ही तो बढ़ानी है इकोनॉमिकली। उस कंजम्पशन को बढ़ावा देने के लिए वो आप जैसे लोगों को इनवाइट कर रहे हैं। सोच लो, अभी भी समय है, फॉर्म नहीं आया अभी प्रीलिम्स का। बात कर लो आज ही शाम को घर पे, बोल दो मम्मी पापा को इटली जा रहे हैं हम, पास्ता की दुकान खोलेंगे वहां पे, व्हाइट सॉस पास्ता, रेड सॉस पास्ता ये बेचेंगे। कुछ ना रखा है सर यहाँ पे इस देश में, सवाए टैक्स देने के और पुअर क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ, इसके सवाए कुछ ना है यहाँ पर। तो ये चीज याद रखो, कल कोई एग्जाम ना हुआ तो कोई वर्क फ्रॉम होम अपॉर्चुनिटी ढूंढे, और वर्क फ्रॉम होम ढूंढ के अपॉर्चुनिटी निकल जाए। पर वैसे तो एग्जाम हो जाएगा, और हो सकता है कि आपकी पोस्टिंग भी इटली या टर्की में हो जाए, तो फिर हमारा काम करा दें, तो मैं तो आ ही जाऊंगा। पूरी सर तो नहीं आएंगे, परिवारवाद है उनका, तो वो बेचारे अभी थोड़ा रुके हैं। पर हमारे साथ ऐसा कुछ नहीं है तो हम आ जाएंगे। चलो देखते हैं जी। ठीक है जी, अब आगे बढ़ते हैं अगले क्वेश्चन पे सर। वन इंट्रीगिंग कंटेम्प्रेरी डिबेट हैज इमर्ज्ड सराउंडिंग द रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन रीजनलिज्म एंड ग्लोबलाइजेशन। इज it complementary, supporting each other along the way, or is it contradictory, giving rise to conflict and friction? Examined through the scholarly prism sir. Scholar here is very important sir. His name is Andrew Hurrell. Andrew Hurrell, Hurrell. Hurrell. Andrew Hurrell has given a very important thesis. He says that what has happened since the end of the Cold War is that since the time globalization has come up as a dominating force in the world, there is a regionalism based movement of labor from one place to the other. What has happened because of this is that this regionalism based movement of labor from one place to the other has affected local demography. So number one, today there is a rising resentment against this demographic change. Case in point, Canada. सर इंडिया से हर दूसरा आदमी पंजाब से उठ के कनाडा चला जाता है. पंजाब में बच्चा पैदा हो रहा है क्योंकि उसका नाम रखा है एल्बर्ट सिंह. एल्बर्टा जाएगा. ओंटारियो सिंह, ओंटारियो जाएगा. भाई अगर हर दूसरा बच्चा पैदा करके आपने कनाडा भेजना है तो पहली बात तो आप देखो कि सर कनाडा में एक डेमोग्राफिक चेंज हो रहा है. और सर इसका कॉन्सिक्वेंस बहुत है. कैनेडियंस डोंट लाइक द इंडियंस कमिंग टुडे इन दैट बिग नंबर. आपको याद होगा, शायद आपको याद नहीं भी होगा, मे बी आप उस समय बड़े छोटे होगे, स्कूल वूल में पढ़ते होगे. 2010 की बात है. 2010 में बहुत सारे बच्चे इंडिया के जो ऑस्ट्रेलिया जाते थे उनकी पिटाई होती थी और बड़े रेशल अटैक्स होते थे इंडियंस. सर ऑस्ट्रेलियंस एंड ब्रिटिश आर वेरी हार्डकोर रेसिस्ट पीपल. वैसे इनमें एक गजब सेंस का एरोगेंस और ईगोइज्म है ऑस्ट्रेलियंस और ब्रिटिश में. तो ऑस्ट्रेलिया में जब हमारे बच्चे बहुत भारी मात्रा में जाने लगे तो वहां पर रेशल अटैक होने लगे उनपे. दैट वाज वन इंडिकेशन व्हाट एंड्रयू हेरल विल से कि इज अ प्रॉब्लम टुडे. दूसरा आप केस देखो सर, अभी ये आपको अब खुद बिल्ड करना है जो पॉइंट मैं बोल रहा हूँ, ट्रम्प्स इमिग्रेशन इशू. सर उसके पूरे पॉलिटिकल कैंपेन का पॉइंट ही वो था जो ट्रम्प ने भारत आके असम जाके हेमंत बिस्वा शर्मा से सीखा था. इनफिल्ट्रेशन इनफिल्ट्रेशन इनफिल्ट्रेशन, घुसपैठी घुसपैठी घुसपैठी. देखो घुसपैठी घुसपैठी करा इन्होंने इतना ज्यादा. झारखंड में क्या हुआ? झारखंड ने झाड़ू चला दिया इन पे. ये आप चीज को समझो सर कि ट्रम्प का जो पूरा कैंपेन इमिग्रेशन पे हुआ कि भाई इमिग्रेशन जो है एक सीरियस प्रॉब्लम है. इमिग्रेशन की वजह से मैं इलीगल इमिग्रेंट्स को आइडेंटिफाई करके डिटेंशन सेंटर में रख के उनको वापस फेंकूंगा. सर दिस इज बेसिकली व्हाट इज कॉल्ड एज अ काउंटर फोर्स अगेंस्ट रीजनलिज्म टुडे. Sir, these kind of activities are not going to promote regionalism. Please be very careful to observe how Trump's immigration policy affects India. Because Trump's immigration policy is bound to promote de-regionalism. De-regionalism. भाई अगर वहां से उठ के लोग वापस आने लग गए इंडिया, यहाँ के क्या करेंगे? यहाँ कौन सी कोई अपॉर्चुनिटी है? यहाँ से बल्कि बंदा सोच रहा है मैं बाहर चला जाऊं, बाहर से वापस आ रहे हैं लड़के अब. Second thing is he says that what has happened because of this is that this too much movement of labor from one place to the other has not contributed to global rise of the skill development. He says that this is the biggest drawback of regionalism. Regionalism only attracts skilled talent. Regionalism does not contribute in building skilled talent. This is a very big point. कि भाई रीजनलिज्म में सबसे बड़ा आपके पास प्लस पॉइंट ये होना चाहिए था ना कि सर दूसरी कंट्रीज में आप ग्लोबलाइजेशन का फायदा उठाते हुए स्किल डेवलपमेंट करते. पर वो चीज तो हो नहीं रही. आप देखो फॉर एग्जांपल आपने सुना होगा एक कॉलेज का नाम लंदन स्कूल ऑफ इकोनॉमिक्स, एलएसई. बड़े चौड़ में आके लोग बोलते हैं आई एम फ्रॉम एलएसई. अबे नजफगढ़ में खड़िया है, जाइल आदमी. एलएसई जाके तूने क्यों खड़ लिया? आके वापस हरियाणा में बैठा है तू. सोच के देखो आप इस चीज को. एलएसई में आपको स्किल दे के लात मार के भगा देते हैं कि गो बैक टू योर कंट्री, वी विल नॉट गिव यू अ जॉब. So the question is कि whatever skill you are giving is neither useful for Britain and nor that skill is useful in India. So that person comes back to India. What do you do? So globalization, regionalism has not promoted what is called as global skill development movement. Very big challenge today. Third problem is he says कि there is inequality on the rise. Poor countries are not gaining because of this skilled movement of labor because of globalization. भाई कौन सा आदमी इंडिया से आज की डेट में माइग्रेट करके युगांडा जाएगा, बुर्किना फासो जाएगा? आपने सुना है किसी को कि फैमिली रिलोकेट कर रही है? कहाँ पे जी? कीनिया. कोई भी नहीं जाएगा सर. तो इन विचारों की क्या गलती है? ये क्यों नहीं डेवलप हो पा रहे? मतलब आप सोचो ना कि ऐसा हो गया कि भाई आप अपना गुड़गांव में आलीशान बंगला बेच के बोल रहे हो अब हम कहाँ जाएंगे, हजारीबाग। अबे क्यों जाएगा हजारीबाग? आप अपना घर बार दिल्ली में जो है पूरा बेच बाच के, साउथ दिल्ली का घर बेच के जो अब आप कह रहे हो हम जाएंगे रांची। अरे पागल, मतलब क्या, मतलब काले काले डोगी ने काटा आपको कि आप रांची जाओगे अपना घर दिल्ली में बेच के? कोई नहीं करता ये सर। अब ये गरीब इलाकों का क्या वो है इनका रीजन कि इनको कोई अट्रैक्ट नहीं कर रहा, इनको कोई फायदा नहीं हो रहा सर। तो ये एक प्रॉब्लम उसने बोली। देन ही सेज द नेक्स्ट इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट, ही सेज कि सर टुडे इज एन एरा ऑफ सुपर स्पेशलाइजेशन, एंड दिस इन दिस एरा ऑफ सुपर स्पेशलाइजेशन regionalism is creating super specialization pockets all around the world. America is one super specialization pocket that has been created. In the finance world, Britain is another area which has been created. France is one super specialization, hospitality wala world is created. So he says the problem is ki, sir, there is no even dispersal of skills everywhere. And the last point that he says is more dangerous, sir. He says that today what is happening is AI, artificial intelligence, is taking up a lot of jobs which are there. And because of this artificial intelligence, what is also happening is that in the future we do not know how it will impact the regionalism in the world. Because if artificial intelligence is going to come in a big way, jobs are going to be displaced. If jobs are going to be displaced, are we going to see breaks on globalization because of this? Breaks on globalization. समझ रहे हो आप? तो ये चीज उसने बोली यार। ट्रम्प वाला पॉइंट बेटा बस आपको बिल्ड करना है, जिसके लिए मैंने आपको वर्कबुक में स्पेस दी है, इसीलिए इस क्वेश्चन के लिए मैंने एक लंबा पेज छोड़ा था आपके लिए। तो वहां पर आप ट्रम्प वाले पॉइंट को अपने आप बिल्ड करके यहाँ पर लिखेंगे, जो न्यूज़पेपर में जनवरी से होगा जब वो आएगा। ठीक है जी। अब आते हैं बेटा अगले पेज पे, वेयर देर इज अ स्कॉलर। स्कॉलर इज बेसिकली एन इम्पोर्टेंट इन्फ्लुएंशियल पर्सन, एंड स्कॉलर्स नेम इज स्टीफन गॉर्बचेव। स्टीफन गॉर्बचेव, इनका मिखेल गॉर्बचेव से कोई नाता नहीं है। स्टीफन गॉर्बचेव says that peace today is based on creativity of tomorrow. Peace today is based on creativity of tomorrow. ये पॉइंट याद रखना। अगला क्वेश्चन देखो सर, हाउ डू हॉल्स्टी कलेवी एंड डेविड विगल define regionalism in South Asia? What patterns have they identified in their thesis? Sir, these two scholars have identified a very important point. They say that regionalism in South Asia is based on number one, identity, number two, territorial affinity, number three, specific way of displaying behavior. Number one is identity, number two is territorial affinity, number three is specific patterns of behavior that people tend to display. अब फॉर एग्जाम्पल इसने थीसिस को कैसे बिल्ड करा? ही सेज कि भाई टुडे at the identity level there is a strong affinity for tradition. People in South Asia today have a strong affinity for their traditions. Any attempt of regionalism that may be promoted in South Asia can only work effectively if tradition is at the core. Tradition is at the core. Yani ki you do not create any kind of regionalism where traditions of the people get affected. Tradition here means the way of life. So you cannot create a regional pattern where traditional way of living of people gets affected, number one. Number two, he says that there is a long affinity that people have not only for territory where they live, but on that territory for the language that they speak. And they say that because language is so diverse across South Asia, that this language has almost become a barrier. for effective cooperation. And this is where they compare South Asia with European Union. They say this is the same problem in European Union, because in European Union, every EU member has a different language. All of them have their representative in the EU Parliament. While they may have a common currency, common foreign policy, but they don't all think as a cohesive unit. That is why, for example, Germany will not look at India in the way the entire EU will look at. EU per se today will say that we don't want to have a very deep relation with India. Germany has a different way of thought. Italy has a different way of thought. So Germany, Italy will think differently. But at least because despite the language barrier, they have a EU Parliament as a common body to debate and discuss, they are able to foster cooperation. Here, what is the problem? That in South Asia, there is language diversity. Because of this language diversity, again, there is no cooperation. And on top of that, there is no common South Asia Parliament type of a body also. सोचो अगर साउथ एशिया पार्लियामेंट टाइप की बॉडी बन जाए, राजीव कुमार उधर भी इंटरनेशनल साउथ एशिया बॉडी का जो है चीफ इलेक्शन कमिश्नर बन जाए, और भाजपा जो है पाकिस्तान में सीटें लड़े, मैं कह रहा हूँ अमित शाह भाई साहब पूरे पाकिस्तान में मेजोरिटी ले आएगा। है या नहीं? आप सोच के देखो एक मिनट के लिए। सारी पार्टियां तोड़ लेगा वो, तहरीके इंसाफ भी तोड़ लेगा, नवाज शरीफ की भी तोड़ लेगा, शहबाज शरीफ की भी तोड़ लेगा, उनमें से सब में जो है पैसे पूसे खिला के अडानी को कह के ले आएंगे, और बाकी फिर मुख्यमंत्री फेस तो वही है राजीव कुमार हर जगह। तो इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में चीज को समझो सर, साउथ एशिया में कोई पार्लियामेंट टाइप की बॉडी नहीं है जैसे ईयू में। अच्छा, देन देर आर सम सीरियस डिफरेंसेस एज द रिसर्च सेज ऑन फूड सर। सर पाकिस्तान में खाना एक अलग लहजे का है, हमारे यहाँ पे खाने का अलग लहजा है। म्यांमार साइड वगैरह पे चले जाओगे, वहाँ चाउमीन वगैरह ज्यादा खाते हैं, उसका लहजा अलग है। तो आप ये चीज को देखो कि सर फूड डाइवर्सिटी भी इतनी है कि कॉमन फूड पैटर्न भी नहीं है, कि जिसकी वजह से एक रीजनल पैटर्न को यूनिफाई करके हम बोलें कि आ जाओ सारे इकट्ठे। हम समझ रहे हो इस चीज को? यूरोप में फॉर दैट मैटर ये चीज है, सारे के सारे वही गंदा ब्लैंड फूड खाते, टेस्टलेस सा उबला हुआ खाना। तो वहां पर इतना कोई फूड कोई जो है यूनाइटिंग फैक्टर नहीं है, जितना डिसयूनाइटिंग फैक्टर भी नहीं है इंडिया में और बाकी कंट्रीज में साउथ एशिया का। ये है कि डिसयूनिटी बहुत है सर। सो रीजनल कोऑपरेशन हिंडर हो रहा है वहां पे। इसके बाद उसने बोला कि सर आउटलुक टुवर्ड्स लाइफ फॉर एवरी साउथ एशियन कंट्री टुडे इज वेरी डिफरेंट। ईच कंट्री हैज अ डिफरेंट आउटलुक टुवर्ड्स हाउ दे व्यू देमसेल्व्स। For example, he says that Nepal today only views itself as a country that does not wish to be exploited by India or China. That is their global outlook. India today aspires to be a global power. China aspires to be a global power. Pakistan aspires to be an irritant power. Afghanistan aspires to gain international legitimacy. Myanmar says we are struggling between military junta and democracy. Bangladesh, same scenario. Bhutan says do not disturb D&D. हमें कोई लेन देन नहीं तुम्हारे किसी से भी, कोई एस्पिरेशन नहीं है जीवन में, हम एग्जिस्ट कर रहे हैं बस, मोमेंट्रीनेस। गौतम बुद्ध, लिव द मोमेंट, फील द मोमेंट। अब इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आप ये देखो यार कि इतने डिफरेंट परसेप्शन टुवर्ड्स वे ऑफ लाइफ, यहाँ पर किस प्रकार की यूनिटी आप फोर्ज करोगे? सार्क फॉर दैट मैटर इज बाउंड टू बी अ फेलियर। सर सार्क एज अ प्लेटफॉर्म टू प्रमोट रीजनल कोऑपरेशन कैन सक्सीड ओनली इफ देयर इज सम एलिमेंट ऑफ कॉमनैलिटी विद रिस्पेक्ट टू फॉरेन पॉलिसी। वो भी नहीं है सर। तो ये चीज को देखो भाई, कॉलोनियल स्ट्रगल में भी आप देखो कि चाइना का परसेप्शन, इंडिया का परसेप्शन दोनों का अलग। चाइना कहती सिविल वॉर वर्क्स, इंडिया कहती गांधी वर्क्स। वहां परसेप्चुअल डिफरेंस। चाइना कहते हैं हम क्रिकेट खेलते ही नहीं, इंडिया में भी तो डिबेट है ना कि क्रिकेट कितने खेलते हैं। आप इंडिया के रूरल साइड पे चले जाओ, हम जी गिल्ली डंडा खेलते हैं, क्रिकेट नहीं खेलते। पाकिस्तान में आप पूछो क्रिकेट, क्रिकेट वहां पे लानती चीज है। लानती मतलब किसी को लानत देने वाली चीज है। मतलब वहां पे क्रिकेट वो है जो हमारे यहाँ पर पॉलिटिक्स है। जैसे हम कहते हैं ना ज्यादा नेता मत बन, वहां पे कहते हैं ज्यादा क्रिकेटर मत बन, मतलब ज्यादा शाना मत बन, क्योंकि निकम्मे हैं उनके क्रिकेटर जैसे हमारे पॉलिटिशियन। तो ये कोई एलिमेंट्स नहीं है जिनके थ्रू कॉमनैलिटी अचीव हो। तो इसके कारण से होल्स्टिकली भी डेविड विगल ये कहते हैं कि सर साउथ एशिया में देर आर सो मेनी डिफरेंट पैटर्न्स दैट एन आर्टिफिशियली क्रिएटेड सार्क is not bound to succeed. It is not bound to succeed. So SARC has multiple reasons for their failure, of which differences in culture, differences in food, differences in identity, differences in the outlook towards life. All these factors play a role, as a result of which SARC as an effective organization can never be built up. क्लियर हो गया जी? ठीक है जी यहाँ तक? पेस में तो कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है। आप ये देखो कि 1 आवर 25 मिनट्स हुए हैं हमें, और 10 पेजेस हमने ऑलमोस्ट कंप्लीट किए हैं। मेरा टारगेट यही है बेटा, अगर मैं आपको बताऊं तो, कि हमें 10 पेजेस पर डे करने हैं वर्कबुक के, 9 to 10, मतलब मैक्सिमम 10, मिनिमम नहीं। और जहां तक अभी आज है, 1 आवर 23 मिनट्स ऑलमोस्ट हमें लगे। ज्यादा भी नहीं करेंगे ताकि ओवर बर्डन ना हो, इतना करेंगे ताकि आपको चीज समझ भी आए और कंफर्टेबली खत्म हो जाए। और अगर हम इस पेस पे चलते रहे तो 23 दिसंबर तक आपका कंप्लीट भी हो जाएगा, उससे पहले ही रादर हो जाएगा, जो प्लान्ड है हमारा। ठीक है जी? तो कोई इशू तो नहीं है यहाँ तक अब? चलो ठीक है फिर। तो हिस्ट्री वाली जो क्लास है उसको थोड़ा प्रीपोन कर देते हैं, 8:45 से स्टार्ट कर लेते हैं, 15 मिनट बाद मैसेज डाल देता हूँ टेलीग्राम पे। चलो मिलते हैं कल।